Now, given the relative imbalance of the emotional systems over the cognitive systems, it raises questions about our freedom. How free are we to make decisions that are in, say, our longer term interest? Right? So, how much capacity do we have to channel our behavior into long term productive pursuits? Um, and that raises this question of freedom. And of course, it's a key concept in political psychology, social and political psychology. So we can make a distinction between two kinds of freedom. We'll call one of them political freedom. And political freedom, then, is this notion that I can choose to do X or Y according to my desires and preferences. So it just means that whatever your desires and preferences are, you can pursue them and act accordingly. There's going to be nobody going to get in your way. So when we say no coercion, no sort of external coercion. Nobody's got a gun to your head, right? You're not put in prison, so you can't pursue your desires and preferences and so on. All right, that's political freedom. Now, it is something that too many people don't have, but it seems sort of like a low bar for what it means to be free, especially by comparison to the concept of psychological freedom. Now here we're going to call psychological freedom. This is freedom that requires that we are the authors of the desires and motivations that drive our choices. You see, here you just take your desires and preferences for granted. And if you can pursue those desires and meet those desires and preferences, then you're free. But it doesn't say where these desires and preferences came from. Psychological freedom goes sort of one level deeper, and it inquires into the origins of the very desires and preferences and motivations and goals that you might have. So here are some questions to ponder. Why do we have certain preferences, motivations, and goals? Are they mine? Do I own them? Or were they installed by processes out of my control, like biology, parents, media, etc.? So you can see the concern for the psychological freedom is this idea that it's not enough to just be able to do what you want. You have to be in control of your wants, right? And that raises the bar considerably higher than the concept of political freedom. So now what does this look like on a cartoon brain? Well, we could say that psychological freedom is when the conscious self, the you, right, is the decider. Now, what is it deciding? Well, it's making decisions. Should I go to this school, that school, buy this phone or that phone, date this person, date that person, have coffee or tea or whatever? But it's not just the decider. It also has some kind of say in the very preferences and motivations and goals that are related to any particular decision, right? So for psychological freedom, there is a lot of power invested in this concept of the you, the I, right? That's the self, your consciousness. You're the one that's making the decision. So psychological freedom requires that your conscious self is the decider, not only of any particular decision, but also is shaping and in control of, regulating the very preferences and motivations and goals that are related to your decisions. So that's a lot of power that seems to be required for psychological freedom to be true. Now, what is this consciousness thing, right? This self thing? Well, here's a little cartoon. In generations past, this was sort of the notion that has been, of course, criticized in modern times. But the idea is, here's your self, right? So here's your brain. And where is this self? What is this thing, this conscious I, this self that we think is in sort of control of our behavior? So in this kind of cartoon, that sort of inside our minds somewhere is this little being, this little homunculus thing that's in control of our behavior and our decisions and so on. Of course, from a modern perspective, this is problematic. I mean, the brain is just a bunch of neural systems, right? And it raises interesting questions about what is the self, and how is that self related to other parts in of the brain, and how does it achieve its decision-making status and so on. So modern psychologists do not embrace this view of the self. But it captures this kind of notion of what psychological freedom might require, that it's you that's making decisions, but also not just choosing to do what you want, but choosing what you want in the first place. Okay, so the problem of owning our choices, so to speak. Well, to be the owner of our choices, it seems to require that we have control over the factors relevant to the choice, such as the preferences, desires, and goals that shape the choice. And so that poses some problems. Well, evolution has equipped us with brain systems that have built-in drives and goals that we didn't choose, right? So if you're heterosexual or homosexual, one could argue that you've got neural systems that are generating certain preferences for your mates, right? So heterosexuals didn't choose that, and neither homosexuals. We didn't choose our parents or the particular set of genes we inherited, right? So we might have certain personalities because we inherited some constellation of genes. We didn't choose that. We didn't give consent to how we were socialized during childhood. So our parents and teachers and other things in our environment were imparting to us knowledge and information, and maybe some of our values and worldview, right, were sort of installed, metaphorically, when we were young, and we did not give consent to that. We don't control unconscious mental processes or the environment that we often find ourselves in. And of course, the environment, as we will see, can have powerful influences on our decision-making and our choices. So, psychological freedom seems in jeopardy. And in fact, modern neuroscience is going to raise several challenges to this concept of psychological freedom. We can see this on another cartoon brain, and we're going to pay close attention to how this is different from the last one. But here, well, we see our preferences and motivations, and here the idea is the word determine here, in conjunction with other factors, unconscious processes, social forces, imitation, conformity, obedience, situational factors. All these factors, the idea here would be, might determine our decision in any given context. And then perhaps our decision is then sent to the systems of the brain that are involved with consciousness, so we become aware of what our decision is. So in this view, the decision happens as a result of other processes in the brain, out of our conscious control, right? So unconscious processes, situational factors, social forces, motivations, preferences that we did not necessarily install in ourselves. Decisions get made, and then it alerts the consciousness systems. Notice how that's different from the psychological freedom view. Here, consciousness is the one that's sort of causing the decision. The arrow is going this way, right? We decide to go here or there, to buy this or that, to date this person, that person. We decide. So the conscious self is the decider. In this view, the decision happens, and then it is accessible to consciousness, and then we might report it. So you see, the causal story is sort of reverse. And we'll look at some evidence from neuroscience that seems to be supporting this picture of what's going on in our minds, in our brains, that decisions are happening, and the consciousness system is being alerted as to what the decision was, but it did not cause the decision. Notice the arrow is going in this direction from decision to consciousness. So for psychological freedom, the consciousness ought to be causally determining the decision, right? What the modern neuroscience is suggesting is that decisions are happening, and then we become aware of those decisions, and we can tell people about it, and we can give all kinds of reasons and justifications for whatever decision it is. And then people think that our reasons and justifications caused the decision, but it might have been the other way around. Decisions were made due to factors that we might not have been aware of, and then we become aware of the decision and then articulate the decision and give justifying reasons. So, what about this idea of free decision making? It becomes challenged with modern psychology. Just a generation ago, there were many scholars who embraced what we'll call the rational choice theory. It postulates that people are rational, seek their own self-interest by calculating cost-benefit ratios effectively. People know their own preferences, what's good for them, how best to achieve their goals, and so on. And it really gave a lot of weight and power to this conscious self making decisions, weighing the alternatives, and behaving in self-interested ways. But today, psychology has documented many examples of how we depart from rationality in significant ways, but predictable ways. And evolutionary theory can help us understand why it is that we do depart from rationality in certain ways. More generally, then, what is it that is undermining or challenging this idea of sort of radical freedom, psychological freedom, that our decision-making systems are affected by many things outside of our control? First of all, we might have different brains than somebody else that might impact our decision systems. Emotional states, as we've seen, have considerable power over the decision-making systems. And sometimes they might be, the emotional systems are representing our interests, whether it be short-term, against our long-term. Sometimes our emotional systems can represent long-term interests as well. But the point is that we can be internally conflicted. Our willpower will often be in conflict with some of these other viscerally motivated systems. And so we can experience that temptation and then the effort to have to resist that temptation. We might have information processing limitations. There are many examples of this. And so some of the biases that we show are related to just the notion that we are limited creatures. We do not have all the information we need to make decisions. And so we have to make a decision with limited information, with uncertainty in our situation. And some of these shortcuts, the ways we use just limited information to make decisions, some of those are called heuristics. Social forces, of course, can influence our decision-making system. And again, we're not in control of many of these aspects. Situational factors, the particular context that we find ourselves, can influence our decision-making systems. And finally, the unconscious processes, a huge area of research in modern psychology. More and more research is showing the influence of unconscious processes on decision-making systems.